welcome back to the Abiding SEO Podcast. It's me, your host, Betsy, trauma therapist turned business coach, and you're at the place where faith meets business. Today, I have a very special guest. We have been friends for a few years now, and she has all these additional training and she's just so awesome. And I'm really excited. She does something called soul care, but I am going to let her introduce herself. Dawn, say hi to the audience.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Betsy. I'm so excited to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Real quick, can we share with the audience what is soul care? Because I know what it is, you
Yes.
know what it is, but it's not everyday language.
Yes, no, that's so helpful to answer that question because a lot of people don't know. I think sometimes when people think of soul care, they think, oh, self-care, like massages and
Mhm.
mani-pedis, and it's much deeper than that. Soul care is more of a holistic way of looking at oneself, but with a spiritual grounding. Like the
Mhm.
spiritual part is super foundational, and it's kind of turning yourself towards that acknowledgement that we are spiritual and everything comes from that. And so soul care is learning how to intentionally start practices to care for your soul, which and then also mind, body, everything. So it kind of encompasses all. And it could be going and getting a massage, but it's more the deeper tuning into the deeper parts of yourself.
Okay, great explanation. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Barbara Peacock, but she
No.
wrote Soul Care from an African American perspective.
Oh, I love it.
Her book is pretty awesome. But the way she explains it is you can have self care without soul care, but you can't have soul care without self care
Oh, I
because
love
it's
that.
so encompassing, which is what you just explained. It includes all of you.
I love, yes, I would. I just wrote her name down. I got to look up her book.
Okay, awesome, super chill to be in her presence. She's cool peoples. But you've added this onto your regular training as a therapist and owning a practice. And how do you integrate that faith element to your day to day?
Yeah, and I love what you're doing because you are talking to leaders about integrating faith. I love your podcast where you just give space to that because I think so many times there's not space to talk about how can I be a successful business owner or a leader and integrate faith because sometimes it's different. It's very different than how maybe some regular business consultant would say. And so I came to it kind of by burnout, by trying to do it like when we are trained in mental health, we are trained in a lot of clinical ways. And even though I went to a Christian seminary to get my master's, I still feel like there was, I don't know, I just feel like there wasn't a lot of the soul talked about. It was definitely more theological integration. So again, more head knowledge. And so when I then got my job right after grad school, I
Mhm.
did a lot of clinical work. I worked in psych hospitals, I worked in jails, treatment facilities. So I couldn't talk about God as much, like openly, but I talked to God about God with clients all the time. But I still took a lot of ownership of I was the healer and it was my job. They're paying me to help them get better. And so that, especially when you start to work with trauma, took its toll. And I kind of not forgot about God because I still had my own relationship with God, but I just didn't really bring it in as much
Yeah.
to the deeper workings of my business. And so then when I started group practice, I don't know, I just didn't integrate it as much as I do now. And so now, well, because I burned out and I'm like, I've got to go back to what I believe. And so I kind of went back to my faith and started doing some deep work with a spiritual director around how I believed God viewed me. And there were some things I had to work through. And
Mhm.
so now how I integrate it, I definitely make sure I'm slowing down my decision process. I'm doing more of a discernment process. I'm definitely more experiential in how I experience God. And so I definitely tune in more. I love your word abide, like the abiding or the attuning. I
Mhm.
try to do that more and spend more time by myself with God
Mhm.
before I make decisions. And I can tell when I don't. Like when I don't do that, I have a lot of anxiety. I don't sleep as well. And I'm not the best to be around.
No, I totally hear you. And one of the reasons I went with Abide, and similar to your experience, you realize there is not this compartmentalization where, okay, on Sundays I'm a Christian, but the rest of the week I'm a business owner. Actually, I'm both all the time,
Yeah,
right?
true.
I'm always walking with him. He's always with me. Now, do I always acknowledge it? That takes effort, which is kind of what you're saying, like this
Yeah.
intentional turning towards him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in your 9 years of business, it's turning towards him before the crisis hits. However,
Hmm.
it's my understanding you recently experienced an obstacle that you told me you're comfortable sharing
Oh, yeah.
that I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate to. Go ahead and start where you want to start.
Yeah. So I think even though we are attuning and abiding and connected to Jesus or God, who, however you experience him, I feel like there's still, it doesn't mean life goes the way we want. It's not prosperity gospel. It's not everything is fine. We still have attachments, is what I call them now.
Mhm.
Like we still get attached to things a little too much. And we put those in our worth and in our place of like our yeah, kind of like where honestly, where God should be. They become our idols, whether we realize it or not. And I don't mean that in like a judgy way. I just mean it happens. Like it's hard and it's there's people in your business and people are messy. And so yeah, I had a situation where I've had a lot of change over the last couple years in my business, but I switched from 1099 contractors to W-2 employees, and it just wasn't an easy transition. I lost a lot of people, but I still had some. I had some that were on leadership that had still been with the old model. Well, there was one who was a very, very close friend of mine,
Mm,
and I knew she was leaving eventually, and we talked about it. We had a plan, and we were being very honest and open, at least I thought, about how it was working. And then 2 days before Christmas break, she said, it's time for me to leave. I'm giving my 2 weeks and I'm taking all my clients across the street. And I was like, wait a minute, that's not what we planned. Like we were going to plan months of this transition. You said you were going to see clients and do groups across the street, and we were going to still provide groups to you and like refer back and forth. And she's like, no, God told me you'd be okay and I'd be okay. And it's time for me to leave. And I'm like, well, why didn't in my head, I'm like, why didn't God tell me? So then I was swirling like, well, why did God tell her and not me? Why didn't God prepare me? And so I was spinning on many levels. And anytime your business changes and people leave in not so nice of a way, I think as a leader, you question, am I doing it right? Am I failing? What have I done wrong? Do I need to change my whole business plan again? I mean, I just went dark fast. But through it all, I'm on the other side of it now. But in the middle of it, I was so emotional. And it led back to different attachment wounds that had nothing to do with her, nothing to do with my business, but it was stuff I felt like God later said, I wanted you free from all of this, and I wanted to redeem it on a deeper level. And I was like, okay, that was painful, but okay. And so, yeah. And so that, I don't know if that's a little bit of it, but I realized I was too attached to some things and I needed to let go of some things and heal still from past stuff, past betrayals, past wounds. And
yeah.
it took a super good friend because I loved her and we were close. I couldn't like demonize her in my head and actions. I had to walk through it messy. I had to walk through it true, where someone who you aren't close to, you can just write them off and move on. But she was going to
Right.
be in my life and I had to deal with it. So
Interesting.
and that's where I felt like God was like, it had to be her. Like kind of, what is the proverb? Kisses, wound from a friend is better than kisses from an enemy. That's how I felt.
Wow.
So yeah, that's the gist.
Well, it's a very important gist because it's permission to feel.
Yeah.
So many times outsiders or other business owners, and I've had, closed door conversations with many leaders, pastors, business owners, and there's this idea of it's ministry, oh, it's business. It's personal, it's relational.
It always is.
We
Yes.
love our teams. We get it a lot, like it's a rupture in the relationship it's a brokenness in the relationship. Sorry, that was clinical language.
Yeah,
Um,
it's okay.
the attachment stuff, I'm all about that. And
Yeah.
we've had conversations about that in the past, and it's okay to grieve and it's okay to feel.
Yeah. And I had to talk to my spiritual director, and she said, like, Dawn, you need to, I forget who she was quoting. It's some famous person. She's like, you need to get the rant out. You're
Mm,
allowed to rant and grieve harshly in front of God. Like she said, you don't, because I felt like I had so many decisions to make. When someone leaves a
yeah,
business, you have to go. But it was Christmas break.
yeah.
I was gonna take 2 weeks off to be with my family, and I had to make all these decisions in the middle of it to protect
Mhm.
my business, and then I felt like this friend was wanting me to hurry up and go through the healing process so she would be okay, and I was like, I can't be around you, I need time." And so it was like, "It's okay to feel," and my spiritual director said, "God will still work when you can't." Like, trust the process, and and just feel, and so I did a lot of feeling and
Yeah.
just let myself be, and that was so helpful because I usually try to button it up quick.
Yeah. Because of the long to do, like you said, this has to get done, this has to get done. And you really is a place of fear instead of trust, right?
So
Fear that it's
true,
all going to fall apart if I don't take action. But
so
this
true.
is a common theme across the board. Like, I mean, church splits, even in construction, right? The painter who then turns around and underbids your bid and now just stole your business, or uh,
Yes,
the, the best advice that I always go to is lead with an open hand.
yeah,
As
and it's
people come
hard.
and go, don't try to hold on, because the minute
It's
you try
yeah,
to hold on to something when it was time to leave, you sabotage
yeah.
God's plan for you. So
Yeah,
just
and I think there's of course, I go to the other extreme, Betsy. There's times where I'm like, "Okay, I'm not gonna attach to anyone. I'll just be this, like,
yeah.
closed," which is not my personality at all, but
Yeah.
I go to the pendulum swing where I'm like, "I don't need to be friends with anyone
Mm,
in my business. I'm done. I will
yeah.
just run this like a CEO, and I'll be cold." And I'm like, "That doesn't work either." So I've had to learn this, like, gray area of
Mhm.
how do I cling to Jesus
Yeah.
and trust him while also being open and vulnerable with my staff, but
Uh-huh.
not it's the open hand things, but not clinging so hard that I'm overly attached.
Yeah.
And
I
so
love that we're doing this, right?
I know.
It's not cling and hold on or push out the door. It's just let it
Yes,
be.
yes,
Just
I
hold
did.
it.
I felt borderline because that's how I explain borderline.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's clinical talk,
Yeah.
like, it's like, don't push, don't pull, just open, and that's hard. It's not easy. It
Mm,
takes training, not
mm.
trying. You have to train yourself to get there, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah. And when I was reading over just the notes and the things you submitted, it reminded me of something I heard, and this really helped me maintain perspective. Like, in a 10-year period, businesses go through cycles. The thing is,
Ooh,
you don't know when it's going to happen. Out of those,
okay.
I'm sorry, I don't know if this is plagiarism. I read so much stuff. I can't
I
remember
know.
where I read
It's
it.
okay. It's
But
okay.
like in a 10-year period, you'll have 3 great years.
I might throw up.
You have 5 average steady, and then you're going to have 2 difficult years. The problem is you don't know when it's going to happen, because when
Okay,
you're having a
yeah,
difficult year, somebody else can be having a great year.
that's
And
true.
well, and then that gets into the whole comparison. But that helps me put perspective, because I know, at least starting out, I thought every year was going to be a great year, right? Every year we're going to increase by 20%.
So
No,
are you talking just business, like, financially, or are you
this is
talking,
just
like,
businesses in
holistically?
general,
Okay.
not therapy
Ooh,
practices, just businesses
okay.
in general. And then some don't make it past the first few years.
That's
The
true.
stats are ridiculous. It's like, what, 70% of businesses fail within the first 3 years?
Wow. Yeah. Well, and I'm so glad you're saying this. This is perfect timing because I just signed a 10-year lease for a new office and I will retire there. It's the perfect building. We in Colorado, it's impossible to buy. I mean, I guess you could buy if you're like a millionaire, but
Mhm.
like buildings are like $3 million. So it's hard to buy. So leasing is the way to go for a lot of business owners. And so I signed a lease, but before it was like a 4-month process of me freaking out, saying, God, I don't know. Cause I've had a rough, more than
Yeah.
2 or 3 years, more rough years. So, and I felt like God said to me, it was very clear. It was a big story, but it was very clear. He said, I will restore what the locusts have stolen.
Love it.
You have to, the next 10 years will not be like the last 10 years. And I
Mhm.
was like, did I hear that correctly? That doesn't mean I'm going to be like rolling in perfect
Yeah.
harmony with everything, but it just meant like you need to trust me that like I know you've had hard years and I am here to restore some of that. And I have called you to this work, which is huge because I almost sold my business last year. Like,
Yeah.
so I was like, what is happening? So it's been such a huge trust journey.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you said that. That made me, it kind of aligns with what I heard.
Yeah. And it's just, prepare for the down seasons.
Yeah,
Just
it's part
store
of it. It
up.
doesn't mean
It's
you're a
gonna happen.
failure. Yeah,
Exactly. It'll bounce back next year or down the road. Just ride the roller coaster. Don't freak out.
it's true. Have you heard of the infinite game? You're playing an infinite game. There's no like you get to this point and you've arrived and then you go to another point. It's
Mm,
like it's an infinite game. There's no end goal really. You have to look at it more broadly. Like this is a
mhm.
roller coaster.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's okay. And you got to enjoy the journey, but you're not alone.
Yes.
I know a lot of people, you know, who at some point it gets rough and you think about closing the business, closing the
Mhm.
church, stopping whatever the project is because you're just
Yes.
done. You're peopled
Yeah.
out, you're burnt out, you lost compassion. I had a professor that she disliked, I'll say it this way, when we use the word burnt out. She's like, it's compassion fatigue. And I was like,
Oh,
okay,
that's true.
yeah,
True.
right. It's you lose your passion for it. And the
Yeah.
passion's what keeps you going in those rough times. I know I've had those moments and had to go back to God. And it's like, Lord, it'd be easier if I was solo. But it's like, I didn't call you to solo. I called you to make a way for the others. And it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I'll keep going.
And I love what you said though. That's the key. That's what soul care is all about is yes, you're doing great things as leaders, but you have to take that time for
Yeah.
yourself to connect to God. If you're a faith believer and that's important to you, that is a key component to combating compassion fatigue and combating these emotional roller coasters is what spiritual practices are you putting in place to help you regulate better, basically, to
Mhm.
not go off the rails?
Yeah. Yeah. So just to wrap up, I'm going to ask you a question that I often ask guests on the show. Just what advice do you have for entrepreneurs out there that are trying to abide
Yeah.
while doing this thing called business?
Yeah. One of my favorite things I like to share is actually a simple thing because I think sometimes we're looking for like the top 5 strategies or whatever, but like a simple thing called the daily examine. If you look that up, you can see it anywhere. I can also send a PDF for it for your
I'll put it in the show
listeners.
notes.
Okay.
Daily
Yeah.
examine.
Yeah, and the daily examine is like an ancient practice that you use the spiritual desert and fathers and mothers used. It's asking at the end of the day, you take just 5 minutes and think back and say, where did I experience God? Where did I not experience God? Where was he present but not so obvious? And you just notice that. What that does is that starts a simple practice of you just tuning in
Oh,
to where was he in my day? And then you start realizing patterns. And so then, like for me, that's when I realized actually I experienced him outdoors. That's not profound. It's just simple. Like, so I need to go on a walk. It's not this huge change where I'm changing my business, but I can tell if I don't walk with Jesus, literally walk outside and experience him in the air. You know what I mean? I know that sounds
yeah.
simple, but it's just simple things like learning to practice simple things that connect you to him.
Mhm. And that looks
So
different for everybody. Yeah.
it does. And some people it's art, some people it's music, some people, I don't know, it's really different, but you have to figure that out. And
Mhm.
so that's the advice I would give is just start to notice and get curious. When do I most experience him? When do I not? And when is it present but not so obvious?
Okay. Well, Dawn, thank you so much for sharing that. I
Yeah.
feel like we could have gone on and on, but I look forward to seeing where God takes you. I know the future
Yeah.
looks bright for both of us. And I will definitely add the daily examine into our show notes and share it with our listeners.
Okay, great. Thanks, Betsy.